You feel it already, don't you? That subtle tug deep in your bones, as if an invisible thread stretches across continents, pulling you eastward or perhaps westward, depending on which way the ancient winds whispered in your ear. The air around you even now seems to thicken, to grow heavier with the dust of centuries, with the silent echoes of countless footsteps. You're not just sitting here. You're standing on the precipice of a vast, sprawling emptiness, a desert that stretches beyond the horizon and into the very fabric of history. And you're about to step into it, not with the bravado of an explorer, but with the slow, deliberate pace of a trader whose greatest hope isn't fortune, but merely to arrive intact, and ideally not entirely parched. This isn't the Silk Road you've read about in textbooks, with its romanticized notions of bustling bazaars and exotic silks. No, this is the Silk Road of tired eyes and aching backs of sand in your teeth, and the persistent low hum of utter boredom. We're talking about the slow churn of reality, where excitement was a fleeting luxury, and the true challenge was simply enduring. Imagine it. You're just starting the sun, a relentless golden orb beginning its ascent, promising a day of relentless glare. The air is still cool, perhaps, for a fleeting moment, but you can feel the warmth building a silent, creeping certainty that by noon you'll be yearning for the shade of a single, gnarled tree that simply isn't there. Your journey begins not with a flourish, but with a grunt. You shift your weight, the coarse wool of your tunic already beginning to itch against your skin. Ahead of you, the line of camels stretches an undulating ribbon of beige against the nascent blue of the sky. Their enormous flat feet pad softly on the sand. A deceptively quiet sound that over hours and days and weeks will become the insistent, maddening rhythm of your life. This isn't a brisk walk, it's more of a shuffle, a slow, methodical placing of one foot in front of the other each step, an almost identical twin to the last. You quickly realize that velocity is a concept entirely alien to this landscape. Speed here is measured not in miles per hour, but in how many sunrises you've endured since your last bath, which, let's be honest, was probably weeks ago. There's a smell, too, isn't there? A complex bouquet of dry earth, the faint tang of camel, and the indescribable scent of distant parched vegetation. It's not unpleasant, not yet, but it's pervasive, settling into your clothes, your hair, even your very thoughts. You try to take a deep breath, but the air is thin, dry, and surprisingly gritty. It's like breathing a very fine-grained sandpaper. Welcome to your new normal. You adjust the heavy pack on your back, the leather straps digging into your shoulders. Inside, there's little comfort. Dried fruits, some hardtack or water skin that already feels too light. Oh, and perhaps a small precious pouch of your most valuable trade good. Maybe it's a handful of shimmering silk threads or a tiny vial of rare spices. Whatever it is, it feels impossibly fragile in this vast and different wilderness. You glance around at your fellow travelers. Most of them are just like you, ordinary folk. Perhaps a bit more weathered, with eyes that already hold a distant knowing weariness. They don't chat much. What is there to say, really? Another day, another dune. The common language of the desert, you quickly learn, is silence punctuated by the occasional sigh. Or a groan. Definitely a groan. The kind that comes from deep within, from muscles you didn't even know you possessed, screaming in protest. You might try to strike up a conversation, but the words feel heavy, awkward, swallowed by the immensity of the landscape. It's too much effort. Easier just to let your mind drift to surrender, to the hypnotic sway of the caravan. And that's the trick, isn't it? To let your mind go. You can't fight the monotony. You have to embrace it. Let your thoughts unravel like old rope. You think about home, perhaps, a distant memory of green fields or bubbling streams, Or maybe you think about the profit you hope to make, a shimmering mirage of coins and comfort that seems impossibly far away. But mostly your thoughts become as dry and repetitive as the landscape itself. You count your steps, you count the camels. You wonder if that distant shimmer on the horizon is an actual oasis, or just the desert playing its favorite trick on the desperate. Spoiler alert, it's usually the latter. Historians still argue whether the Silk Roads were truly roads in any modern sense or simply a collection of interconnected paths and trade networks that shifted and changed with the whims of nature and empires. You, however, are experiencing it firsthand. It feels less like a road and more like a suggestion, a faint whisper across the land that says, if you walk this way long enough, you might eventually reach somewhere else. There are no signposts, no neatly paved surfaces, just the vague impression left by thousands of years of weary feet and hooves. It's a geological expression of patience. One of the mainstream historical facts that often gets overlooked in the grand narratives is the sheer logistical nightmare of supplying these caravans. Imagine not just carrying enough water for yourself and your animals, but enough fodder for weeks or even months. You couldn't just pop into a roadside convenience store for a bag of chips and a soda. Every single bite, every single sip had to be meticulously planned and hauled. It wasn't just about moving goods. It was about moving a self-sustaining ecosystem across an unforgiving landscape. And that, my friend, is exhausting just thinking about. As for a quirky tidbit, did you know that in some parts of the Silk Road, especially further west, they actually bred specific types of dromedary camels for their endurance in the sand, while in the colder, mountainous eastern stretches, the Bactrian camel, with its two humps, was preferred for its ability to store more fat and withstand harsher climates. You probably don't care right now as you're just trying to put one foot in front of the other, but it's a testament to the incredible adaptation of these animals. You eye the camel nearest you, its broad, flat teeth slowly grinding some tough desert shrub. It seems entirely unbothered by the vastness, almost contemptuous, of your human frailty. Lucky beast. It just he is. You, on the other hand, are trying. The sun climbs higher. The air shimmers. The horizon, once a distinct line, now blurs into a hazy, indistinct smear. You feel a bead of sweat trickle down your temple, then another, then a whole stream. Your mouth is dry. You start to fantasize about water, not just a sip, but a deep, cool, endless draught. You can almost taste it. It's a dangerous game, this fantasy, because it only makes the reality of the dust and the heat more acute. You pull the rough cloth of your head, covering lower, trying to shield your eyes from the relentless glare. Every step is a small act of defiance against the overwhelming indifference of the desert. And you've only just begun. The journey stretches before you, a vast, yawning expanse promising nothing but more dust, more heat, and an endless, rhythmic shuffle towards a distant, uncertain destination. Try not to think about how many more sunrises and sunsets you'll witness from this moving, dusty prison. Just breathe and shuffle. You're settling into it now, aren't you? That particular kind of ache that starts in your feet and slowly, relentlessly crawls up your shins, then your thighs finally settling in your lower back like a stubborn guest who refuses to leave. Your feet, once relatively soft, are transforming, molding themselves to the contours of your worn leather sandals, becoming less flesh and more like the very earth you tread upon. Every single step for hours on end is a testament to the fact that humans were perhaps not originally designed for this kind of relentless, unvarying perambulation. You can feel every pebble, every grain of sand, every slight incline and decline. It's an intimate, almost uncomfortable connection with the ground. You might have started this journey with a spring in your step, full of optimistic visions of shimmering silks and exotic spices. Now that spring has been thoroughly squashed, replaced by a sort of leaden plod, the novelty of the vast, open sky has given way to the oppressive sameness of it. You try to entertain yourself. You hum a tuneless, forgotten melody. You count the distant, hazy mountains. You play a game of what if that cloud was it's always a camel, isn't it? Or a very lumpy donkey? The hours stretch out, elastic and unending, each one indistinguishable from the last. It's a kind of meditation, perhaps, but one enforced by exhaustion rather than intention. You're not clearing your mind. You're just too tired to fill it with anything interesting. The camels, bless their perpetually unimpressed hearts, seem to be built for this. Their long, gangly legs swing with a peculiar, almost lazy grace. They don't sweat much, you notice, or at least not in a way that's obvious to your parched human eyes. They just amble, with an air of dignified boredom. You, on the other hand, are a walking, breathing, sweating testament to human inefficiency in the desert. You wipe your brow for the 10th time in an hour, and it's barely mid-morning. The water in your waterskin is already lukewarm, tasting faintly of goatskin and desperation. One mainstream historical fact that often surprises people is just how slow the pace of these caravans truly was. We're not talking about galloping across the desert like in the movies. A typical caravan loaded with goods and accompanied by walking traders might cover a mere 20 to 30 kilometers, about 12 to 18 miles on a good day. Think about that. That's a brisk morning walk for some. But you're doing it every single day under a relentless sun, carrying everything you own for weeks or months on end. It makes you appreciate modern transportation, doesn't it? You could practically cross the entire breadth of what was once the Silk Road in a single, slightly uncomfortable, long-haul flight. Back then, it was an epic saga of blisters and boredom. And here's a quirky tidbit to chew on while you shuffle many traders, especially those dealing in high-value, low-volume goods like precious stones or spices, actually developed their own specific gaits or paces. It wasn't about speed, but about efficiency and conserving energy. Some would even tie bells to their ankles, not for a jaunty tune, but to maintain a rhythmic, almost hypnotic stride that minimized wasted effort. Imagine a silent symphony of jingling ankles, a subtle metallic whisper carried on the wind, each bell marking another slow, deliberate step across the vast emptiness. You can almost hear it, can't you? A very sleepy, percussive art form. Historians still argue whether the concept of desert blindness, a form of temporary visual impairment caused by prolonged exposure to intense sunlight and glare, was a common affliction for Silk Road travelers. You, however, are certainly starting to feel the effects. The sun is a blinding white disk, burning away the subtleties of the landscape, leaving everything in stark, unforgiving relief. You squint, trying to distinguish between distant sand dunes and the shimmering heat haze. It's like looking at the world through a dirty, scratched lens. You develop a habitual half-squint, an expression that will probably be permanently etched on your face by the time this journey's over. The worst part, perhaps, isn't the physical discomfort, but the mental one, the monotony. It's a relentless current pulling you into a quiet stupor. You start to notice the smallest things, the way a single, stubborn weed manages to cling to life in a crack in the dried earth, the intricate patterns left by the wind on the sand, the subtle shifts in the color of the sky, from palest blue to a deeper, almost indigo hue as evening approaches. These observations, once a source of mild interest, now just serve to highlight the utter lack of anything new or exciting. It's like watching paint dry, but the paint is sand, and the drying takes months. You try to distract yourself. You imagine the faces of your family, their voices. You mentally recount every coin you possess, calculating the potential profit from your goods. You rehearse conversations you might have at your destination or arguments you might win. But even these mental exercises eventually lose their luster. Your brain, like your body, craves novelty, and the desert offers none. It just is vast, silent, and endlessly, relentlessly the same. You might even find yourself talking to the camels. Not out loud, of course, because that would be truly unsettling, but in your head. All right there, big guy, got a bit of a wobble in your step today, don't you? Or perhaps, if you picked up the pace just a little bit, we could be there by... Oh, never mind. Their only response is a slow blink of their long-lashed eyes, or perhaps a soft, guttural rumble from deep within their massive chests. They're judging you, you're sure of it. Judging your weakness, your impatience, your utter lack of camel-like stoicism. As the afternoon wears on, the shadows begin to lengthen, stretching like weary limbs across the dunes. The air, though still warm, loses some of its harsh edge. There's a subtle shift, a softening of the light, a hint of the blessed relief that evening might bring. You instinctively quicken your pace just a fraction, pulled by the promise of rest. Your legs are screaming now, a dull, insistent throb. But the thought of stopping, of shedding your pack, of perhaps even finding a small flat patch of ground to collapse onto is a powerful motivator. You learn to read the signs of your body. The first hint of a cramp, the dull ache behind your eyes, from squinting, the persistent tickle in your throat from the dust. You learn to conserve energy, to breathe slowly and evenly, to take small sips of water rather than desperate gulps. Survival here is a masterclass in efficiency, in stripping away all unnecessary movements and desires. You become a minimalist of motion. And as the last sliver of sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples that feel almost too vibrant for the muted landscape, you finally halt. The lead camel kneels with a groan, then another, a domino effect of weary beasts. You, too, sink to the ground, your muscles protesting with every fiber. For a moment, you just sit there, head bowed, utterly spent. The silence of the desert at night is profound, a thick blanket, woven from the absence of sound. Only the whisper of the wind and perhaps the distant cry of a desert fox break the stillness. This, you realize, is the daily grind. This is the Caravan Yawn, and you've only just scraped the surface. The night descends, and with it, a peculiar kind of relief washes over you. The relentless sun, that golden tyrant of the day, has finally abdicated its throne, replaced by a sky so vast and so deeply black it feels almost breathable. And the stars, oh, the stars. They blaze with an intensity you've never witnessed, a glittering dust storm flung across the velvet expanse. For a moment, just a fleeting moment, you forget the aches, the dust, the endless shuffle. You just look up and feel impossibly small, yet strangely connected to something ancient and immense. It's a feeling that will become both a comfort and a quiet torture on this journey. The vastness of the universe mirroring the vastness of the desert, both equally indifferent to your weary existence. But even under this celestial blanket, comfort is relative. The desert, having baked all day, slowly begins to surrender its stored heat. The air cools, sometimes dramatically dropping temperatures that will surprise you with their speed. You huddle with your companions around a small crackling fire, fueled by dried camel dung and scrub brush. It throws weak dancing shadows that make the familiar faces around you seem alien, flickering specters in the gloom. The conversation, if there is any, is hushed, punctuated by yawns that stretch your jaw until it aches. Everyone is too tired for grand pronouncements or lively debates. It's just shared silence, the soft crackle of the fire, and the occasional snore from a sleeping camel. Sleep, when it finally comes, is not the deep restorative kind you crave. It's a fitful, shallow doze punctuated by the rustle of the wind, the distant cry of an animal, or the sudden, unsettling thought that you've forgotten to tie down that one loose strap on your pack. You pull your cloak tighter, trying to ward off the encroaching chill that seems to seep into your very bones. The ground beneath you, hard and unyielding, offers no comfort. Every shift of position brings a new protest from a sore muscle or a stiff joint. You wake frequently, disoriented, momentarily, forgetting where you are before the vast, silent darkness reminds you still in the middle of nowhere. One mainstream historical fact that often goes unmentioned when talking about Silk Road caravans is the crucial role of water management. It wasn't just about finding an oasis. It was about meticulously rationing every drop. Caravans often had specialized water masters, whose sole job was to assess water sources, determine consumption rates for humans and animals, and ensure enough was carried to reach the next known supply. A miscalculation could mean disaster. It was a constant low-level anxiety that permeated every waking and sleeping moment. Imagine being responsible for the hydration of dozens of people and hundreds of animals with no modern meteorology or precise mapping. That's a pressure most of us can barely comprehend. It's like being in charge of the snacks for a marathon, but if you run out, everyone dies. No pressure. Here's a quirky tidbit about these vital oases. Sometimes the water wasn't just scarce, it was odd. Travelers reported oases with highly mineralized water that tasted strange or even caused mild digestive upset. Other times the water was perfectly fresh, but the pools themselves might contain unexpected inhabitants. Think small, tenacious fish, or even in more tropical fringes, the occasional crocodile. Imagine crawling half dead to a shimmering pool only to find a scaly, toothy resident giving you the stink eye. Talk about an unexpected dip. No wonder some traders chose to travel with a small, collapsible, and easily stored water filter, a simple cloth and charcoal contraption, just in case. Historians still argue whether the concept of a true oasis culture existed where these isolated pockets of life developed distinct social customs and even specialized trade goods based on their unique resources. You, however, are just grateful for the idea of one. The thought of an oasis, a verdant haven in the vastness, is what keeps you putting one foot in front of the other during the long, hot days. It becomes a mirage of hope, a whispered promise that someday, sometime, you will reach a place where water flows freely and the ground isn't just endless sand. And then one glorious sun-baked afternoon it appears. Not the shimmering, illusory kind, but real. A dark smudge on the horizon that slowly, agonizingly resolves itself into a cluster of date palms, their fronds waving gently in the faint breeze. The sight sends a jolt through the caravan. A collective sigh, audible even over the soft padding of camel hooves, ripples through your group. Even the camels seem to pick up their pace, their heads held a little higher, sensing the approach of sweet water and lush fodder. As you draw closer, the air actually feels different, cooler, heavier with the scent of green growing things. You pass the desiccated remains of previous travelers who didn't quite make it, a stark, grim reminder of the desert's unforgiving nature. But you push the thought away. You're here. You made it. The first glimpse of the actual water, a small shimmering pool reflecting the impossibly blue sky, is almost enough to bring tears to your dust-rimmed eyes. This isn't just water, it's salvation. You rush forward, heedless of dignity, pushing past your companions, your throat aching for that first glorious gulp. The water is cool, sweet, and tastes like nothing you have ever experienced. You drink until your stomach aches, splashing some over your face and neck, feeling the grime of days wash away, if only for a moment. The camels, meanwhile, are already at the trough, drinking deeply, their humps seeming to swell with renewed vigor. It's a brief, blissful respite. But even at the oasis, true rest is elusive. There are tasks to be done. Water skins need to be refilled, food supplies checked, animals tended to. You might encounter other caravans stopping for a brief exchange of news or perhaps a wary negotiation over shared resources. Some oases were small, just a spring and a few trees, while others grew into bustling market towns, vital hubs where goods were exchanged, news disseminated, and weary travelers could find a bit more comfort. You might even find a small makeshift tavern where you can buy a cup of something vaguely fermented or perhaps some dried dates and nuts. It's not a five-star resort, but after days of sand and silence, it feels like paradise. The gentle murmur of conversation, the rustling of palm fronds, the soft gurgle of water. It's a symphony of life after the deafening silence of the desert. You might even hear a joke or two, a low chuckle that's been bottled up by the oppressive monotony of the journey. But even as you savor this fleeting comfort, a part of you knows it's temporary. Tomorrow the caravan will stir, the camels will groan, and you will once again begin your slow, shuffling journey into the vast, indifferent unknown. The oasis is a pause, a breath, but the road, the long, dusty road, stretches on. And already a familiar weariness begins to settle back into your bones, even as the sweet water still lingers on your tongue. Refreshed, if not entirely rejuvenated by the brief respite at the oasis, you once again find yourself back in the familiar, rhythmic sway of the caravan. The scent of fresh water and green things, a fleeting memory, is quickly replaced by the ever-present aroma of dust camel and the subtle, often surprising scent of your cargo. You might think that silk, for instance, would be a delicate, almost ethereal presence, but you soon learn that even the most exquisite goods have a materiality, a palpable weight and presence that becomes intimately familiar. You glance at the bundled bales, strapped securely to the camels' backs, or perhaps nestled carefully in your own pack. This isn't just stuff, it's the very reason for your relentless plodding. And while the romance of the Silk Road often centers on the exotic nature of these goods, you're experiencing the unglamorous truth of their transport. These aren't just rolls of fabric. They are meticulously folded, expertly packed lengths of woven thread, each one representing weeks, months, or even years of labor. Imagine trying to keep something as delicate as raw silk pristine while bouncing across a desert for thousands of miles. It's a logistical ballet performed by dusty, exhausted dancers. One mainstream historical fact that often goes unappreciated is the sheer volume of goods beyond just silk that traveled these routes. While silk gave the road its name, it was far from the only commodity. Caravans carried everything from precious metals and jewels to furs, ceramics, lacquered goods, and even livestock. Spices like cinnamon pepper and cloves, medicines, perfumes, and dyes were also incredibly valuable. In the opposite direction, goods like wool gold and even slaves made their way east. It was a dizzying array of products, each with its own quirks for transport. You realize that your small pouch of goods is just a tiny, tiny fraction of a vast, intricate economic web. And here's a quirky tidbit. Did you know that some particularly fastidious silk merchants would actually try to air out their bales of silk during cooler parts of the day? They believed that the constant confinement and dampness from camel sweat could impart an undesirable odor to the delicate fabric affecting its value. So imagine stopping the entire caravan, carefully unlashing massive bales, unrolling them just enough to catch a breath of desert air, and then meticulously repacking them, all for the sake of aroma. It sounds like a lot of work for something most people wouldn't even notice, but in the cutthroat world of ancient trade, every detail mattered. It's like trying to keep your designer handbag fresh on a cross-country camping trip. Good luck. Historians still argue whether the primary value of silk on the Silk Road was its actual utility as fabric or its symbolic power as a luxury, good a marker of status and wealth. You, however, are just focused on keeping your hands clean because heaven forbid you get a smudge on that pristine, shimmering fabric. You can almost feel the delicate threads beneath your fingertips, even through the layers of protective wrapping. The silk itself feels almost alive, soft, and cool to the touch, whispering of distant looms and meticulous craftsmanship. It's a strange contrast, this epitome of luxury being hauled through such a raw, untamed landscape. You learn to recognize the subtle differences in the bales, the rough, protective outer wrapping of coarse wool or hide that shields the precious cargo within, the tight knots and intricate lacing that secure the bundles, designed to withstand endless jostling and shifting. You see the pride in the eyes of the merchant whose goods are particularly well packed, a silent boast of their meticulousness, and you understand why. A tear, a stain, a loosening of the bundle could mean significant financial loss, transforming a potential fortune into a pile of ruined fabric. The visual landscape continues its slow, hypnotic shift. From vast, flat plains of sand, you might now be entering regions of low, rolling hills, or perhaps the beginnings of more rocky, uneven terrain. The colors of the sand might change from pale ochre to a deep, ruddy red, hinting at different mineral compositions. Each subtle change is a landmark, a tiny victory against the endless sameness. You find yourself noticing these things almost unconsciously as your mind seeks any anchor point in the vast expanse. The camel in front of you lets out a long, drawn-out burp, a surprisingly loud and resonant sound that echoes in the quiet air. You stifle a tired chuckle. These creatures, for all their stoicism, are full of unexpected vocalizations. Sometimes it's a soft gurgle, sometimes a low grumble, sometimes a sound that can only be described as a wet sneeze. They're like grumpy, enormous toddlers, endlessly complaining, but ultimately always moving forward. And you're just along for the ride, or rather the walk, trying to keep pace with their deliberate, unhurried gait. As the day wears on, you might find yourself briefly exchanging glances with other traders. There's a quiet camaraderie that develops a shared understanding of the hardships. You might nod or offer a fleeting, tired smile. Words aren't always necessary. The exhaustion is a universal language. You might notice the specific type of goods another caravan is carrying, a quick assessment of their potential wealth or their likely origin. It's a silent calculus of opportunity and threat, a subtle dance of observation that happens almost entirely beneath the surface. And as the afternoon sun begins its slow, inevitable descent, casting long, distorted shadows across the land, you begin to anticipate the evening halt. The promise of shedding your pack, however briefly, is a powerful motivator. You imagine collapsing onto the sand, however hard, however cold it might become. The very thought of it makes your aching muscles protest a little less. The value of true rest, you realize, is a currency more precious than any silk or spice, and you're earning every single bit of it, one slow, dusty camel-paced step at a time. The world of luxury feels impossibly far away, yet you carry its very essence on your back. It's a peculiar irony, isn't it? As twilight deepens, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange, a different kind of tension begins to settle over the caravan. The physical exhaustion of the day slowly gives way to a mental weariness, a quiet vigilance born of the desert's hidden dangers. You've heard the whispers around the campfire, the cautionary tales passed down from one generation of weary traders to the next, tales of shadows that move with unnatural speed, of whispers on the wind that aren't the wind at all. This isn't the kind of heart-pounding fear of a sudden ambush, not usually. It's something more insidious, a low-level hum of anxiety that never quite dissipates. The silence of the desert night, once a balm, now feels heavy, pregnant with unseen possibilities. Every rustle of dry brush, every distant cry of an animal makes you subtly tense. You pull your cloak a little tighter, not just against the chill, but against the unknown. Your hand might instinctively stray to the small, sturdy knife you keep tucked into your belt, a meager but reassuring weight against the vast indifference of the night. This is the time when the lines between reality and the exhaustion-induced tricks of your mind begin to blur. Was that a shifting dune or something moving behind it? Did you hear a faint jingle of a bridle, or was it just the wind playing tricks? One mainstream historical fact that underscores this pervasive anxiety is the constant threat of bandits and raiders. These weren't always grand armies. More often, they were small, opportunistic groups, desperate men who knew the terrain intimately and preyed on isolated caravans. While heavily armed escorts were common for larger groups, smaller outfits like yours often relied on sheer numbers and constant vigilance. It was a brutal fact of life on the Silk Road, and the fear of losing your precious cargo, your means of survival, and even your life was a very real, very present shadow. And here's a quirky tidbit that might make you chuckle. Even with your weary brain, some particularly superstitious or paranoid traders would carry small talismans of protection, not against bandits, but against jinn or mischievous desert spirits. These might be intricately carved amulets, dried herbs sewn into cloth bags, or even specific patterns of knots tied into rope. Imagine after a full day of arduous travel, meticulously arranging your collection of anti-spirit charms around your meager sleeping spot, as if a tiny bag of dried sage is going to stop a determined thief. But hey, when you're that tired, any comfort, however irrational, is welcome. It's the ancient equivalent of checking under your bed for monsters. Historians still argue whether the presence of these constant threats fostered a stronger sense of community and mutual reliance among caravan members, or if it merely amplified a pervasive distrust and suspicion. You, however, feel the subtle shift. You might glance at your sleeping companions, a mixture of exasperation at their snoring and a quiet gratitude for their shared presence. There's strength in numbers, even if those numbers are just a handful of perpetually tired individuals. You take turns on watch, a task made infinitely harder by the sheer desire to collapse into oblivion. Your eyes burn, your eyelids feel weighted with lead, but you force them open, scanning the inky blackness. The watch is a solitary internal battle. You try to stay awake to focus. You mentally list your goods, count your money plan, your next move. But the darkness and the silence are a powerful sedative. Your mind drifts. You recall snippets of conversations, faces from home, the taste of a meal long forgotten. Your thoughts wander to the shimmering silks you carry, imagining the opulent lives of those who would eventually possess them, a stark contrast to your own dusty, dangerous existence. You chuckle dryly. They have no idea what it takes. Suddenly a sound. A faint, almost imperceptible scuffing noise, barely audible over the whisper of the wind. Your heart jumps, a sudden sharp rap against your ribs. You freeze, straining your ears. Was it just a trick of the wind, a shifting dune, or something else? You grip your knife tighter, your knuckles white. You hold your breath, listening, listening. After an agonizing moment, nothing. The silence returns thick and unbroken. You let out a slow, shaky breath. False alarm. Probably. Your senses are playing tricks on you, amplified by exhaustion and the lurking fear. You tell yourself it's nothing, but the adrenaline still hums beneath your skin, a jarring counterpoint to your desire for sleep. This is the quiet terror of the Silk Road, not the roar of battle, but the constant nagging doubt, the perpetual what if. You learn to distinguish between the various sounds of the desert night. The soft, regular breathing of the camels, the occasional rustle, as one shifts its weight, the dry creak of leather. Anything outside of these familiar sounds sends a jolt through your system. You become a master of subtle listening, your ears attuned to the slightest deviation from the norm. It's an exhausting level of sensory input when all you crave is oblivion. As the pre-dawn light begins to paint the eastern horizon, with a faint pearly glow, the night's vigil slowly draws to a close. The shadows recede, revealing the familiar contours of the dunes, the shapes of your sleeping companions. The threat, real or imagined, slowly retreats with the darkness. You feel a wave of immense relief, almost debilitating in its intensity. You slump against your pack, allowing yourself to finally, truly relax. But even as the sun begins its ascent, promising another day of relentless heat and endless walking, you know the cycle will repeat. Tonight, or the next night, or the night after that, the unseen dangers will lurk again just beyond the firelight. And you, the weary trader, will once again pull your cloak tight, grip your knife and stare into the vast, indifferent darkness, listening for that one telltale sound. The Silk Road offers treasures, yes, but it exacts a price, not just in coin, but in sleep, in peace of mind, in the quiet, persistent hum of fear that settles into your very soul. You yearn for the safety of numbers, for the reassuring presence of a vigilant companion. But even then, the desert sometimes finds a way. The sun rises again, a slow, indifferent climb above the dunes, painting the sky with the same fiery promise of heat and endless, dusty miles. But today, a different element begins to assert itself subtly, deliciously in the dry air. You notice it first as a faint, almost ephemeral whisper on the breeze, then a more definite hint until it becomes a pervasive aromatic cloud that seems to cling to your clothes and seep into your very pores. This isn't the smell of sand or sweat. This is the scent of the cargo itself, particularly if your caravan is carrying the prized treasures of the East, spices. Imagine it, the sharp, invigorating scent of cinnamon, hinting at distant forests and exotic warmth. The pungent, almost earthy aroma of pepper. A quiet fire that tickles the back of your throat. And then the intoxicating sweetness of cloves. A rich, complex perfume that promises luxury and distant, lavish feasts. These aren't just dry powders in sacks. They're concentrated essences, each one a tiny world of flavor and scent. And as you trudge along the gentle jostling of the camels, causes these invisible clouds to waft, sometimes subtly, sometimes in a surprisingly potent burst. One mainstream historical fact that often gets overshadowed by the allure of silk is the immense economic and cultural impact of the muck spice trade. Spices were incredibly valuable, often worth their weight in gold, not just for flavoring food, but also for medicines, perfumes, religious ceremonies, and even as preservatives. The demand for spices drove much of the early exploration and trade shaping empires and altering global economies. You're not just moving goods, you're moving a crucial part of the ancient world's infrastructure, its very sensory palette. And here's a quirky tidbit to tickle your weary brain. Some traders believed that carrying certain spices, particularly frankincense or myrrh, would not only ward off evil spirits, but also help to keep the caravan members awake and alert during long, monotonous stretches. They'd occasionally open a small pouch, inhale deeply, and claim a renewed vigor. It was like an ancient, all-natural energy drink, though perhaps less effective than a strong cup of coffee. Imagine a drowsy merchant taking a deep whiff of pungent resin, hoping it'll fend off the inevitable caravan yawn. It probably just made them sneeze. Historians still argue whether the primary role of spices in ancient diets was genuinely for flavor enhancement, or if their strong aromas were primarily used to mask the taste of less than fresh food, especially meat in an era before refrigeration. You, however, are just grateful for anything that breaks the monotony of dust and camel. The smells are a welcome distraction, a momentary transport to a more vibrant, aromatic world. They weave through your senses a quiet, almost hypnotic perfume. You can almost feel the individual grains of pepper through the coarse sackcloth, imagining the tiny, wrinkled berries that hold such immense power. You think of the effort involved in their cultivation, the long journeys they've already made from distant lands, India, Indonesia, the Arabian Peninsula. Each spice has its own story, its own invisible journey, embedded within its fragrant molecules. It's a testament to human ingenuity and desire that people would trek across such inhospitable lands for something as seemingly simple as a sprinkle of flavor. The heat builds, of course, as it always does. The sun beats down with a relentless physical pressure. Your throat feels like sandpaper again, and the ubiquitous dust coats your tongue. But then a subtle waft of cardamom, sweet and floral, drifts past, and for a fleeting moment you forget the discomfort. It's a sensory paradox, the overwhelming harshness of the desert, punctuated by these tiny, luxurious explosions of scent. You might even notice the effect on the camels. Sometimes a particularly strong gust of wind will send a cloud of chili powder or ground ginger towards them, causing them to sneeze, a sudden, explosive sound that startles everyone. You can't help but crack a small, tired smile. Even these stoic beasts aren't immune to the sensory onslaught. It's a small moment of levity in the endless, serious business of survival. As the day progresses, the sun begins its slow descent, painting the sky in soft, fading hues. The air cools and the scents become sharper, more distinct. The evening brings with it the promise of a halt, of shedding your heavy pack, of perhaps even a meager meal cooked over a small, sputtering fire. And as you finally stop collapsing onto the cool sand, the pervasive scent of spices still clings to you, a gentle reminder of the day's journey. It's in your clothes, your hair, even the very air you breathe. You reach into your own modest pack, perhaps for a piece of dried fruit or a hunk of hard bread. But as you eat, you notice the subtle flavor of the spices in the air, a phantom seasoning that makes your plain food seem just a little bit more exotic. It's a small gift from the journey, a sensory echo of the vast aromatic world you are traversing. And as you drift off to sleep, the last thing you smell is that comforting, familiar bouquet, a lullaby spun from cinnamon pepper and the endless dust of the Silk Road. You might even dream of grand banquets tables, laden with spiced delicacies far removed from the grit and grime of your current reality. But even in your dreams, the gentle sway of a camel's gait is present an insistent, rhythmic reminder of the journey's unending path. The sun has finally surrendered its dominion, dipping below the horizon with a theatrical flourish of color. You've settled into the routine of evening, a familiar ballet of weariness and efficiency. The camels are kneeling, grumbling softly, as their burdens are unlashed. A small fire crackles a beacon in the encroaching gloom, its smoke rising in a thin, pale column against the deepening indigo sky. And now, as the chill of the desert night begins to seep into your bones, your thoughts turn almost involuntarily to the promise of shelter, however rudimentary. Tonight, you might be lucky enough to find yourself at one of the legendary, yet often surprisingly unglamorous, Caravan Yawns. These weren't your modern roadside motels with complimentary breakfast and questionable vending machines. Oh no. A caravanserai was at its most basic a fortified roadside inn, a safe haven from bandits and the elements. Imagine a large square or rectangular enclosure, usually built of sun-baked mud brick or stone with a single massive gateway that could be securely barred at night. Inside a vast open courtyard surrounded by arcaded rooms or cells. It's functional, utilitarian, and utterly devoid of anything resembling creature comforts. But after days of sleeping on the hard open ground, even a roof over your head feels like unimaginable luxury. One mainstream historical fact about these vital waypoints is that they were not just places for rest. They were crucial centers of information exchange. Traders from different regions speaking different languages would gather, sharing news of market prices, political developments, and crucially warnings about dangerous areas or bandit activity. Imagine the ancient equivalent of a slow-motion Twitter feed delivered by exhausted people over lukewarm tea. This information was vital, as it could mean the difference between a profitable journey and utter ruin. And here's a quirky tidbit you might find amusing in some particularly bustling caravanserais, especially those near major cities. It wasn't uncommon for enterprising locals to set up small, impromptu entertainment services. We're not talking about lavish theatrical productions, mind you, but perhaps a lone musician playing a reedy instrument, or a storyteller reciting epic poems for a few copper coins. Imagine trying to get some much-needed sleep, while a rather monotone flute player attempts to serenade a group of equally exhausted merchants. It's like trying to nap on a long-haul flight with a crying baby and a persistent seat kicker. Pure bliss. Historians still argue whether the standardization of caravanserai design across various empires from Persia to the Ottomans was a deliberate act of architectural policy or a natural evolution based on pragmatic needs and shared building knowledge. You, however, are just focused on finding a spot. You shuffle into the courtyard, the air thick with the combined smells of animal dung, stale sweat, and cooking smoke. The noise level, after days of desert silence, is almost overwhelming. The braying of donkeys, the low murmurs of human voices, the clatter of cooking pots, the gentle snorting of camels settling down for the night. You navigate through the milling throng of people and animals. Every square foot of space is precious. The arcaded rooms are already largely occupied, each little cell containing a small universe of bedrolls, packs, and weary bodies. You find a cramped spot, perhaps in a corner or against a wall, and quickly unroll your thin bedroll. It's not much, just a padded mat and a coarse blanket. But it's your space, your temporary sanctuary. The sheer humanity of the caravanserai is both comforting and suffocating. You are surrounded by strangers, yet you are all bound by the shared experience of the road. You see merchants haggling over prices, their voices low and intense. You see porters collapsing with groans of exhaustion. You might even catch a glimpse of a weary soldier, his armor dulled by dust, guarding a particularly valuable shipment. It's a microcosm of the Silk Road itself, all condensed into this enclosed, bustling space. Dinner, if you're lucky, is a simple affair, perhaps some tough dried meat, stewed with lentils or just bread, and dates washed down with strong bitter tea. The food is often bland, designed for sustenance rather than flavor, but after the relentless walking, it tastes like a feast. You eat quickly, fueled by pure hunger, barely tasting the individual ingredients. The communal eating can be awkward, or it can be a rare moment of connection. Sometimes you might share a pot of tea with a fellow traveler, exchanging a few words, learning a snippet of their story. The sounds of the caravanserai slowly begin to fade as night deepens. The conversations grow softer, the footsteps less frequent. One by one, the small oil lamps flicker and die, plunging the courtyard into semi-darkness. You try to sleep, but it's a different kind of fitful rest than in the open desert. Here you're assailed by the sounds of human sleep, the symphony of snores, the restless shifting of bodies, the occasional cough or murmur from a vivid dream. It's strangely comforting in a way to know you're not alone, but it's certainly not conducive to deep slumber. You pull your blanket tighter, trying to ignore the draft that seeps in from the cracks in the ancient walls. Your mind, too tired to truly think, wanders through the day's endless miles. You feel the ghost of the camels sway, the persistent gritty texture of dust on your tongue. And as the night wears on and the collective snoring reaches a crescendo, you find yourself yearning for the quiet, if dangerous, silence of the open desert. At least there, the only sound you had to contend with was your own internal monologue of exhaustion. Here, it's a full orchestra of slumbering humanity. And somewhere, perhaps, that reedy flute player is still trying to hit that high note. Sleep, you realize, is a luxury. True, undisturbed sleep. That's the real treasure of the Silk Road one rarely found. You emerge from the caravanserai, blinking in the harsh light of dawn, feeling no more rested than when you lay down. The air still holds the stale, mingled scents of last night's human and animal occupancy, a stark contrast to the fresh, dry air of the open desert. Your body, despite the brief illusion of shelter, still aches, and your mind already begins its familiar retreat into a state of semi-conscious endurance. But today brings a new challenge, a different kind of slow, tedious negotiation with the landscape. River crossings? You might scoff. A river in the desert. But the Silk Road wasn't just an endless expanse of sand. It traversed a diverse range of environments, from parched deserts to fertile river valleys, and from arid steppes to towering mountain ranges. And while a river might offer a welcome source of water, it also presents a significant logistical hurdle for a slow-moving caravan laden with precious, often water-sensitive goods. This isn't just a leisurely paddle. It's a strategic operation demanding patience, muscle, and a good deal of stoicism. One mainstream historical fact that illustrates the challenge of river crossings is the reliance on temporary bridges or rafts. Unlike modern roads with sturdy permanent bridges, ancient river crossings often involved building makeshift structures, or more commonly utilizing simple rafts constructed from inflated animal skins, reeds, or timber. Imagine the collective effort required to float dozens of heavy bales and reluctant camels across a flowing body of water, all while trying to keep valuable silks and spices dry. It was a slow, perilous dance, often taking hours, if not an entire day, to complete. And here's a quirky tidbit to ponder as you eye the shimmering surface of the river ahead. Some particularly cautious or superstitious merchants would perform small rituals before crossing, such as tossing a few grains of their most valuable spice into the water as an offering to the river spirits, hoping for a safe passage. Imagine throwing a pinch of saffron worth a fortune into the murky depths just to appease some watery deities. It sounds utterly absurd to a modern mind, but when your entire livelihood is tied to the whims of nature, a little bit of ancient insurance can't hurt, right? Historians still argue whether the presence of navigable rivers significantly influenced the specific routes taken by Silk Road caravans, or if the necessity of reaching distant markets simply forced traders to overcome these watery obstacles regardless of their difficulty. You, however, are just focused on not falling in. The river looks deceptively calm from a distance, a ribbon of silver threading through the landscape. But as you draw closer, you hear the subtle murmur of the current, the soft lapping against the banks, and you realize its power. The air here is different, too. It's slightly cooler, carrying the faint, earthy scent of damp soil and growing reeds, a refreshing change from the persistent dryness of the desert. But it also carries a new kind of dampness that you quickly discover is not friendly to your already stiff joints. You can feel the moisture seeping into your clothing, making everything feel heavier, clammier. The process begins. The lead camels are guided into the water, their powerful legs finding purchase on the riverbed. They groan and protest as camels are wont to do, their long necks stretched out, eyeing the water with suspicion. You watch, perhaps helping to push a particularly stubborn beast from the rear. The water splashes cold and surprisingly strong, soaking your lower legs. Your shoes squelch. Great. Another discomfort added to the ever-growing list. Then comes the cargo. The most valuable bales, those containing silk or delicate spices, are carefully loaded onto rafts, often manned by local ferrymen who know the currents and the shallow spots. You might assist straining your muscles to lift a heavy bundle, feeling the awkward weight of it, the fear of a slip, a fall, a plunge into the murky water. The thought of losing an entire season's profit to a careless moment sends a chill down your spine, far colder than the river water. The current pulls at the raft, making it difficult to control. The ferrymen shout instructions, their voices echoing across the water. You push with long poles or strain against ropes, trying to keep the precious cargo steady. It's a slow, painstaking process, each crossing a miniature drama of effort and anxiety. You watch other members of your caravan, their faces set in grim lines of concentration, their muscles straining. No one speaks much. The focus is too intense. Hours crawl by. You are perpetually wet, your clothes clinging uncomfortably. The sun, which felt so oppressive in the desert, now feels almost welcome, offering a faint hope of drying out. Your hands are rough from pulling ropes, your feet numb from the cold water. The rhythmic rocking of the rafts, combined with the sheer exertion, is a new kind of hypnotic, almost soporific experience. You could almost fall asleep right here, mid-river, lulled by the gentle slosh and creak. And finally, mercifully, you reach the other side. The relief is palpable, a collective exhalation from the entire caravan. The camels lumber out of the water, shaking themselves, sending spray everywhere. The cargo is carefully unloaded, checked for any signs of water damage. There's a flurry of activity, of drying clothes and checking knots before the slow, steady march resumes. As you walk away from the river, the air gradually begins to dry your clothes, leaving behind a faint, earthy scent. but your feet remain squishy and your shoulders still ache from the effort of pushing and pulling. You look back at the silver ribbon of water, a momentary barrier overcome. It's another reminder that the Silk Road isn't just about the straight path. It's about the detours, the obstacles, the slow, deliberate negotiation with every single element of the natural world. And for now, you're just grateful to be on solid dry, albeit still dusty ground. Until the next river, that is, and you know with a weary certainty there will always be a next river. You've survived the relentless sun, the anxious nights, and the damp, squelching misery of river crossings. Just when you thought you'd seen every iteration of exhaustion the Silk Road could offer, the landscape begins to change again subtly at first, then with an undeniable, imposing presence. The flat, seemingly endless plains give way to a different kind of challenge. The slow, relentless ascent into mountain passes. This isn't a gentle incline, it's a deliberate, breath-sucking climb where every step feels like an act of pure will. The air thins here noticeably. You feel it in your lungs, a slight burning sensation. With each strained breath, a faint dizziness that never quite goes away. The dust of the lowlands is replaced by gritty rock and the occasional sharp scent of pine or hardy mountain scrub. The silence, which in the desert was vast and empty here, feels immense and oppressive, punctuated only by the whistle of the wind through high peaks and the labored breathing of the caravan. The camels, those surprisingly adaptable creatures, seem to find their footing on the rocky paths with their broad padded hooves, but even they move with a more deliberate, cautious pace. You, however, feel every single ascent, every steep incline that threatens to send you tumbling backward. One mainstream historical fact that often gets overlooked is the sheer altitude some sections of the Silk Road reached. For instance, parts of the Pamir Mountains, often referred to as the roof of the world, could see caravans traversing passes at altitudes exceeding 4,000 meters, around 13,000 feet. Imagine hauling heavy goods and yourselves over terrain higher than most major peaks in Europe, often in freezing temperatures, even in summer. It wasn't just cold. It was brutally unforgiving, pushing both humans and animals to their absolute limits. It's not a walk in the park. It's a slow, agonizing crawl up a very large, very cold hill. And here's a quirky tidbit to distract you from the altitude sickness. In some of these high mountain passes, particularly those prone to avalanches or rock slides, local guides would sometimes employ a peculiar method to test the stability of the snow or loose rock. They would send a single expendable donkey or goat ahead of the main caravan, listening for the telltale rumble or shift. If the animal made it, the path was clear. If not, well, better a goat than a camel full of silk, right? It's a harsh reality, but an undeniably practical one. Survival often required such grim calculations. Historians still argue whether the extreme weather conditions and treacherous terrain of these mountain sections primarily served as natural barriers limiting the volume of trade, or if the sheer demand for goods simply forced traders to find ingenious ways to overcome them regardless of the cost in human and animal lives. You, with your burning lungs and leaden legs, are firmly in the camp of, "This is a barrier, dear Lord." The days here are a blur of slow upward motion. The air is crisp biting even when the sun is out, and the wind, unimpeded by trees or hills, whips around you, tearing at your clothes and chilling you to the bone. You pull your cloak tighter, regretting every layer you didn't bring. You might pass patches of stubborn snow, even in the height of summer, a stark reminder of the unforgiving climate. Your hands already chapped from the sun, and dust now crack from the cold and dryness. The scenery, for all its majesty, quickly loses its appeal. Towering snow-capped peaks might be beautiful in a painting, but when you're slowly slogging up their flanks, they just represent more effort, more pain. The sheer scale of it all makes you feel insignificant, a tiny ant crawling across the back of a sleeping giant. The silence is profound, broken only by the crunch of your boots on gravel, the rhythmic thud of the camels, and the occasional dislodged pebble tumbling down a steep slope. Each sound echoes amplified by the vast, empty space. Negotiating narrow ledges, rocky outcrops, and slippery, scree slopes becomes the new normal. You learn to place your feet with precision, to conserve every ounce of energy. A misstep here could mean a serious injury or worse. The casual chatter of the lowlands is long gone, replaced by focused silence, broken only by grunts of effort or the occasional shouted warning. The bond between the caravan members, forged in shared suffering, becomes even stronger. You rely on each other, offering a steadying hand, a silent nod of encouragement. Nights in the mountains are brutally cold. Even with a fire, the pervasive chill seems to penetrate everything. You huddle closer to your companions, sharing what little warmth you can. Sleep is even more elusive, disturbed by the howling wind, and the constant fear of rock slides or sudden blizzards. You wake up stiff and sore, every joint protesting the cold and the exertion, and then you begin the agonizing climb all over again. You might even find yourself wishing for the open desert again, for all its heat and dust. At least there you could see the horizon. Here the world is compressed, defined by the towering peaks that surround you, by the next uphill climb, by the relentless vertical challenge. The thin air makes even simple tasks exhausting, and conversation feels like a luxury you can barely afford. As you finally agonizingly reach the summit of a particularly grueling pass, you might pause for a moment, gasping for breath, looking back at the winding path you've ascended. It's a strange mix of triumph and utter exhaustion. The view is breathtaking, yes, a panoramic vista of jagged peaks and distant hazy valleys. But your appreciation is colored by the knowledge of the immense effort it took to get here, and the weary certainty that what goes up must eventually come down. And often coming down can be just as treacherous, just as slow, just as utterly beautifully draining. The wind whips past you, carrying the chill of the eternal snows, a crisp, clean scent that paradoxically brings no comfort, only a deeper sense of cold and an even deeper yawn. Having slowly, painfully descended from the bone-chilling heights of the mountain passes, you find yourself in a landscape that, while still rugged, feels a touch more hospitable. The air is thicker here, less biting, and the sun, while still strong, seems to warm rather than burn. But with this relative ease comes a new layer of complexity, a different kind of negotiation that requires not physical strength, but a weary patience. Diplomatic doze-offs. You are approaching or have already entered a new territory, and that means dealing with its local authorities. Imagine arriving at a dusty outpost, perhaps a small fortified town or a fortified caravanserai acting as a border crossing. This isn't a cheerful welcome wagon. Instead, you're met by stern-faced officials, often wearing layers of heavy cloth, and an air of immense, unshakable boredom. Their job is to control passage levy taxes and ensure the rules of their particular ruler are followed, and their primary tool, bureaucracy. Slow, deliberate, and utterly soul-crushing bureaucracy. One mainstream historical fact that underscores this reality is the complex system of tolls, taxes, and permits that governed trade along the Silk Road. It wasn't a free-for-all. Every major principality, kingdom, or empire along the route would levy duties on goods passing through their territory. These taxes could be a percentage of the value of the goods a fixed fee per camel or even a tribute in kind. And the process of assessing these duties, inspecting goods, and stamping permits often involved long, frustrating delays. And here's a quirky tidbit to keep your eyelids from drooping too much. Some particularly shrewd or impatient merchants would occasionally forget to declare a small, high-value item, hoping it would slip past the sleepy eyes of the customs officials. They might hide a tiny pouch of gems in a hollowed-out piece of dried fruit, or a few precious pearls tucked into the folds of their clothing. It was a constant game of cat and mouse, and the stakes, if caught, could range from a hefty fine to the confiscation of your entire cargo. It's the ancient equivalent of trying to sneak extra snacks into a movie theater. High stakes indeed. Historians still argue whether the cumulative effect of these numerous tolls and taxes significantly hampered the overall volume of trade on the Silk Road, or if the immense profit margins on luxury goods simply absorbed these costs without deterring merchants. You, however, are just focused on not falling asleep standing up, while the official, with agonizing slowness, counts and recounts every single bale on your camel. The process is invariably tedious. You stand in the sun, or perhaps in the shade of a crumbling wall, while the official, usually perched on a stool behind a rickety table, slowly unfurls a scroll of parchment. Their eyes, often half-lidded from the heat, or simply disinterest scan the document. Then they look at you. Then they look at your camels. Then they look back at the scroll. It's a dance of deliberate slowness, designed, you suspect, to test your patience. And yours is already stretched thinner than the finest silk. You answer questions, your voice hoarse, from dust and disuse. Where are you from? What are you carrying? Where are you going? Each answer is met with a slow, deliberate nod or a faint, almost imperceptible shake of the head. Sometimes they'll demand to inspect a bale, forcing you to unlash and unwrap a portion of your painstakingly packed goods, only for them to give it a cursory glance and wave a dismissive hand. It's an exercise in frustration. The language barrier adds another layer to the tedium. You might speak a common trade language, a simplified lingua franca, but even then, nuances are lost and explanations become agonizingly drawn out. You resort to gestures, to pointing to, counting on your fingers, feeling incredibly foolish as you do so. The officials, of course, seem to derive a perverse satisfaction from your struggles. The hours stretch. The sun climbs higher, then begins its slow descent. You shift your weight from foot to foot, your legs aching. You suppress another yawn, forcing your eyes wide open, trying to project an air of alert respectability, even though inside you're just a puddle of exhaustion. You just want this to be over. You want to sign the papers, pay the fee, and get back to the open road where at least the only challenge is nature's indifference, not human obstinacy. Occasionally, there's a problem, a missing seal on a document, a discrepancy in the reported weight of your goods, a suspicion that you're carrying something undeclared. These are the moments that send a jolt of cold dread through your weary frame. These are the moments that require more than just patience. They require negotiation, perhaps a small, carefully placed gift, to expedite the process, or a lengthy, frustrating argument that drains every last ounce of your mental energy. You learn to choose your battles wisely. Sometimes it's cheaper to pay a small bribe than to spend another day or even two stuck at a dusty checkpoint. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, the official grunts, dips a pen into an inkwell, and with a flourish that seems utterly out of place given their previous lethargy, stamps the document. You're free to go. A wave of immense relief washes over you, so potent it almost makes you lightheaded. You quickly relash your goods bid, a hasty farewell, or perhaps just a relieved nod, and guide your camels through the gates. As you leave the checkpoint behind, the tension slowly bleeds out of you. You're back on the open road, the familiar rhythm of the caravan resuming. The air feels lighter, cleaner, even with the ever-present dust. You've overcome another hurdle, not by brute force, but by quiet endurance, and a surprising capacity for diplomatic boredom. And you know with a weary sigh that this won't be the last time you'll have to deal with the slow, sleepy dance of ancient bureaucracy. The path to profit is paved not just with dust and sweat, but with endless forms and half-closed eyes. Having navigated the exasperating labyrinth of border officials and their penchant for diplomatic doze-offs, you find yourself back in the vast, open embrace of the Silk Road. But the landscape has shifted again. You're no longer in the endless, featureless desert or the stark, silent mountains. Instead, you're entering regions where human presence is more evident, where the paths widen and converge, where the air hums with a distant murmur of other lives. This is where the true cultural crossroads emerge, places where different peoples, languages, and customs brush shoulders, sometimes gently, sometimes with a quiet clash, all against the backdrop of shared profound weariness. Imagine the caravan pulling into a bustling market town, not as grand as a major city, but still a vibrant hub of activity. The smells are a riot, roasted meats mingling with the sharp tang of leather, the sweet aroma of dried fruits, and the earthy scent of unfamiliar spices. The sounds are a cacophony, a babble of languages you barely recognize, the insistent cries of vendors, the braying of animals, the metallic clink of coins. After days or weeks of relative silence, this sudden sensory overload can be disorienting, almost jarring. You feel a strange mix of relief and overwhelmed anxiety. One mainstream historical fact about these cultural crossroads is the incredible linguistic diversity that thrived along the Silk Road. Merchants often had to be polyglots, or at least familiar with a handful of common trade languages like Sogdian Persian or a simplified form of Turkic. Imagine trying to conduct complex negotiations, haggling over prices and establishing trust, when you can barely understand half of what's being said. It forced a reliance on nonverbal cues, on shared gestures, and on an intuitive understanding of intent. It's like a perpetual game of charades, but with your livelihood at stake. And here's a quirky tidbit that might make you smile. Among the numerous items exchanged at these crossroads were not just goods, but also curious stories and bizarre rumors. Imagine a trader from the West recounting fantastical tales of sea monsters and lands where the sun never set, while a merchant from the East might share equally unbelievable accounts of fire-breathing dragons or cities built entirely of jade. These stories, often exaggerated by the hardships of travel and the isolation of the route, were a form of entertainment, a way to pass the long, boring nights, and a testament to the incredible cultural exchange happening, however indirectly. It was the ancient world's version of viral content, except it traveled by camel. Historians still argue whether the exchange of ideas and technologies along the Silk Road was primarily driven by deliberate intention and curiosity, or if it was simply an inevitable byproduct of commercial activity and accidental diffusion of knowledge. You, however, are witnessing the quieter, more human side of this exchange. You might find yourself sharing a meal with someone whose clothing customs and beliefs are utterly alien to your own. You observe their rituals, their gestures, the way they interact with their families and their gods. There's a cautious curiosity, a subtle exchange of glances, a silent recognition of shared humanity, despite profound differences. The clashes, when they occur, are rarely violent. More often, they are quiet misunderstandings, a missed nuance in a negotiation, a misinterpreted gesture, a slight offense taken where none was intended. You see merchants from different regions haggle fiercely, their voices rising, their hands gesturing emphatically. Each has their own style, their own ingrained cultural norms of commerce. A Western merchant might be direct and boisterous, while an Eastern trader might be subtle and indirect, relying on implied meanings. It's a delicate dance of cultural expectations, often leading to moments of awkward silence or exasperated sighs. You might notice the distinct architecture of the buildings, the unique patterns on the textiles worn by the locals, the different shapes of their pottery. Even the very way people walk and carry themselves might be subtly different. These are not grand, sweeping cultural movements. They are the granular details that tell a story of millennia of independent development now brought together by the shared purpose of trade. You are a silent observer, absorbing these myriad differences, adding them to your growing internal map of the world. Sometimes the language barrier is so profound that communication breaks down entirely. You might resort to drawing pictures in the dust or pointing emphatically at your goods, trying to convey a price or a desired quantity. It's frustrating, certainly, but also occasionally amusing. You might find yourself laughing at your own inability to communicate a shared moment of weary exasperation with the local vendor. Laughter, you find, is one of the few truly universal languages. As the day in the market town draws to a close and you prepare to move on, you carry with you not just the goods you've acquired or sold, but also a patchwork of experiences, a fleeting understanding of different ways of life. You've seen faces from lands you've only ever dreamed of, heard snatches of languages that sound like music or harsh static, and perhaps even sampled food that was both delicious and utterly alien. The Silk Road, you realize, isn't just a path for goods. It's a conduit for human connection, however brief and however strained by exhaustion. It's a place where differences are highlighted, yet where a shared sense of the road, of the struggle, of the sheer bone-deep weariness creates an unspoken bond. As you shuffle onward, leaving the bustling town behind, the quiet hum of the caravan resumes. But now it's a hum that carries faint echoes of foreign voices, lingering scents of unfamiliar spices, and the quiet understanding that the world, despite your own small corner of it, is vast, varied, and utterly beautifully exhausting, and you're just a tiny, dusty part of its immense, slow-motion ballet. Having traversed the vibrant, albeit chaotic cultural crossroads, you feel the pull of your destination, growing stronger, almost like a magnetic force. The air, though still carrying the pervasive dust, is now laced with anticipation. You're approaching a major city, a true hub of commerce, and the sensory input begins to intensify long before you actually see the city walls. This is where all those slow, agonizing miles converge, where the silent journey bursts into the overwhelming yet ultimately draining spectacle of the Moat Bazaar's blurred bounty. Nah. Imagine the sounds first, a distant rising murmur that slowly resolves into a roar. The incessant babble of thousands of voices, the rhythmic clang of hammers, the insistent cries of vendors, the braying of donkeys, the jingling of countless small bells. It's a symphony of commerce, a living, breathing entity that pulses with an energy almost overwhelming after the quiet solitude of the road. Your ears, accustomed to the silence of the desert, feel assaulted. Then come the smells, an intoxicating, dizzying blend of everything you've ever smelled, and then some. The pungent aroma of raw leather, the sweet, cloying scent of dates and figs, the sharp, acidic tang of fermented grains, the heavy perfume of exotic spices, the metallic whiff of fresh forged iron. And always, always, the underlying scent of dust and humanity. Your nose, previously dulled by monotony, is now overwhelmed, unable to distinguish one scent from another. It's a fragrant fog. One mainstream historical fact that highlights the sheer scale of these bazaars is that they often weren't just simple markets. They were complex, multi-layered economic ecosystems. Major cities along the Silk Road, like Samarkand, Bukhara, or Chang'an, boasted sprawling bazaar districts often divided into specialized sections: the spice market, the silk market, the goldsmith's quarter, the pottery seller's lane. Each section had its own rhythm, its own unique set of sights, sounds, and smells. It was a dizzying array of choices designed to extract every last coin from your weary purse. And here's a quirky tidbit to amuse your overstimulated senses in some of the larger bazaars, especially in Central Asia. Certain merchants, particularly those selling rare or valuable goods, would employ professional hawkers or criers, whose sole job was to shout out exaggerated praises of their wares in a theatrical, almost musical fashion. Imagine trying to negotiate a serious business deal while a man just a few feet away is loudly extolling the virtues of a particularly robust camel in song. It's an auditory assault, a blend of commerce and impromptu performance art, all designed to capture the attention of weary, half-dazed travelers. Historians still argue whether the extreme sensory overload of these ancient bazaars was a deliberate tactic to disorient buyers and encourage impulse purchases, or simply an inevitable consequence of concentrated trade in a pre-industrial era. You, however, are certainly feeling the disorientation. Your eyes dart from one stall to another, trying to take it all in, but everything blurs into a kaleidoscope of colors, shapes, and movement. Bolts of shimmering silk draped alongside piles of rough wool, gleaming metalwork next to delicate ceramics, mountains of dried fruit beside bags of pungent herbs. It's too much. You push your way through the throng, feeling the brush of other bodies, the occasional jostle. You try to keep your hands on your coin purse, a constant low-level worry in the back of your mind. Every second person seems to be trying to catch your eye, to pull you towards their stall, their voices a persistent drone of enticement. Fine silk traveler, spices fresh from the south, jewels like starlight. The negotiation process itself is a slow, intricate dance. Prices are rarely fixed. It's a game of bluff and counterbluff, of patient waiting and feigned disinterest. You, after weeks of quiet solitude, find your voice rusty, your haggling skills dulled. You yearn for the straightforward honesty of the desert, where a yes meant yes and a no meant no, not a convoluted performance designed to extract every last bit of profit. The merchants here are masters of their craft, their faces unreadable, their smiles fleeting. You hold up a piece of pottery or a length of fabric, examining it closely, trying to hide your exhaustion, trying to appear shrewd and discerning. The merchant launches into a lengthy spiel, praising the item's quality, its rarity, its superior craftsmanship. You nod, feigning attention, while your mind drifts to a comfortable bed, a hot meal, a moment of silence. Your eyelids feel heavy, threatening to betray your fatigue. The sheer volume of goods is dizzying. You see things you never knew existed: tools and ornaments and foodstuffs from lands far beyond your imagination. Each item represents another journey, another tired trader, another silent caravan. It's a vast web of interconnected lives, all brought together in this pulsating, overwhelming heart of commerce. As the day wears on and the sun begins its descent, the light shifts, casting long, distorted shadows across the bustling lanes. The energy of the bazaar, though still immense, begins to wane. replaced by a different kind of exhaustion. Vendors begin to pack up their wares, their voices growing hoarse. You too feel utterly spent, your head throbbing, your senses overwhelmed. You've traded your goods, perhaps acquired new ones, but the process has extracted a heavy toll. You find yourself stumbling through the fading light, trying to navigate the narrowing pathways, your mind a muddled mess of prices faces and persistent smells. The bounty of the bazaar, once a source of excitement, now feels like a blur, a chaotic dream. All you want is to escape the noise, the crowds, the endless demands on your attention. You yearn for the quiet solitude of the open road again, for the predictable rhythm of the camel's gait, for the blessed empty silence of the desert. Because even exhaustion, you realize, has its preferred setting. And for you, it's definitely not here amidst the overwhelming, glorious, and utterly draining chaos of the market. You just want to close your eyes and let the blurred bounty fade into the merciful darkness. Leaving the overwhelming cacophony of the bazaar behind you, step back into the relative quiet of the city's outskirts, or perhaps onto a quieter road, leading away from its gates. A different kind of emotion begins to settle over you now, a subtle yet potent shift in your weary spirit. It's the burgeoning feeling of homeward hopes, a quiet longing that mingles with the ever-present ache in your bones. But these hopes are often accompanied by heavy hearts laden with the memories of the journey, the perils faced, and the sheer exhausting distance still separating you from everything familiar. The air here feels different from the deep desert or the thin mountain passes. It might carry the scent of irrigated fields or the smoke from distant cooking fires, perhaps even the faint, reassuring smell of a familiar domestic animal. These small cues, however, subtle, begin to paint a picture of home, a mental image that has sustained you through countless dusty miles. You think of the faces you left behind, the voices you yearn to hear, the comfort of your own bed, however humble. It's a powerful motivator, a quiet promise whispered directly to your tired soul. One mainstream historical fact that underscores this feeling is the cyclical nature of Silk Road trade. Most merchants weren't one-time adventurers. They were professional traders making these grueling journeys repeatedly throughout their lives. This meant that the concept of home was incredibly important, a touchstone in a life defined by constant movement and separation. Each successful journey meant a return to family, to community, to a place of belonging that grounded their nomadic existence. You're not just a wanderer. You're a boomerang, always destined to come back. And here's a quirky tidbit about this longing. Some traders, particularly those from distant lands, would carry small personal tokens from home. A smooth, polished stone from their garden, a lock of a child's hair, a tiny dried flower. When the weariness became too much, or the loneliness too profound, they would discreetly touch or look at these items, a tangible link to the world they yearned to return to. Imagine the comfort of a tiny, ordinary pebble, transformed into a powerful talisman by sheer distance and desperate longing. It's like carrying a faded photograph in your wallet, but with far higher emotional stakes. Historians still argue whether the persistent longing for home among Silk Road traders led to a more conservative and insular approach to cultural exchange, or if the sheer diversity encountered eventually broadened their perspectives despite their personal preferences. You, however, are experiencing a blend. While your mind races ahead to familiar comforts, your body carries the indelible marks of every foreign land you've crossed. The landscape, as you move closer to your own region, starts to look more familiar. The plants, the type of soil, the subtle undulations of the terrain, they all begin to feel less alien, more like part of a remembered song. You might recognize landmarks from previous journeys, a particularly gnarled tree, a distinctive rock formation, a specific bend in a dry riverbed. Each one is a silent confirmation that you are indeed on the right path, that the end is finally within reach. But with these rising hopes come heavy hearts. The journey leaves its scars both visible and invisible. You think of the dangers you narrowly escaped, the relentless physical discomfort, the mental fortitude required to simply keep going. You might recall a companion who fell ill and had to be left behind, or a camel that succumbed to exhaustion. The road, you realize, takes a piece of everyone who travels it. And while you are returning, you are not returning unchanged. You might find yourself surprisingly quiet even around your fellow traders. The shared suffering of the outward journey has given way to a more introspective mood. You're preparing for the transition back, the reintegration into a life that paradoxically might feel strange after so long on the move. How do you explain the subtle shifts in the desert wind or the way the stars blaze in a mountain sky to someone who has never left their village? Some experiences are simply incommunicable. The camels, too, seem to sense the change. Their steps might be a little more purposeful, their ears perhaps more alert. They are creatures of habit, and the rhythm of return is as ingrained in them as the rhythm of departure. You pat the neck of your lead camel, a silent gesture of gratitude for its immense strength and stoicism. You've been partners in this ordeal, and there's a quiet respect that has grown between you. As the sun begins to set on what might be one of your last full days on the road, the finality of the journey looms. You'll soon be home. But the memory of the endless miles, the parched throats, the freezing nights, the wary glances at the horizon for bandits, these won't simply fade away. They'll become part of you, etched into your very being. The sweet anticipation of home is a powerful balm, but it can't erase the profound transformation wrought by the road. You've seen things endured, things that have irrevocably changed your perspective. The familiar comforts of home will feel sweeter, certainly, but also perhaps a little smaller, a little less grand than they once did now that you've experienced the vastness of the world beyond. Your dreams, you suspect, will still be filled with the endless stretch of distant sands, the ghostly swaying of a camel, and the quiet, persistent hum of the Caravan Yawn, even after you're safely tucked into your own bed. The Silk Road, you realize, is not just a path. It's a persistent echo in your very soul. You've made it. The city walls, familiar and comforting, loom larger with every step. The sounds of urban life, once overwhelming, now feel like a welcoming embrace. You can almost taste the promise of a warm meal, a proper bed, the familiar faces of loved ones. But even as the relief washes over you, a deeper, more subtle reflection begins to take hold. This arduous journey, this endless trudge across continents, has extracted a toll beyond just physical exhaustion. It's the merchant's melancholy muse. A quiet introspection on the profound psychological weight of such constant slow travel. For weeks or even months, your world has been defined by a relentless rhythm. Wake, walk, eat, sleep, repeat. Your senses have been dulled by monotony, sharpened by danger, and overwhelmed by fleeting moments of chaos. You become a creature of endurance, your mind focused almost entirely on the immediate task of survival and forward motion. Now, as that immediate pressure lifts your mind like a tightly wound spring, suddenly released, begins to unfurl, revealing the quiet burdens it has carried. One mainstream historical fact that supports this emotional landscape is the high incidence of psychological distress, among long-distance travelers in pre-modern times. While not formally diagnosed as depression or anxiety, as we understand it today accounts from ancient travelogues, often describe periods of profound loneliness, ennui, and a deep pervasive weariness that went beyond physical fatigue. The sheer isolation, the constant low-level danger, and the lack of familiar comforts took a significant toll on the human spirit. And here's a quirky tidbit that speaks to this melancholic state. Some seasoned Silk Road travelers would develop a strange habit of talking to their camels, not just in their heads, but out loud, having full one-sided conversations. It wasn't just about giving commands. It was about having a constant, non-judgmental presence to voice their fears, their frustrations, their philosophical musings on the vastness of the world. Imagine whispering your deepest worries to a chewing camel whose only response is a slow blink and a gentle rumble. It's a testament to the profound need for connection, even if it's with a beast of burden. Historians still argue whether the extreme spiritual practices adopted by some traders on the Silk Road, such as intense prayer meditation or even self-flagellation, were primarily driven by genuine religious devotion or by a desperate attempt to cope with the profound psychological stress and existential loneliness of their journeys. You, however, feel the quiet hum of something deeper. The melancholy isn't a sadness, not exactly. It's more like a profound sense of perspective born from having witnessed the vastness of the world and the insignificance of your own struggles within it. You look at the bustling crowds around you, at people absorbed in their daily routines, and you feel a strange sense of detachment. Their concerns, their small dramas, seem almost trivial after the epic scale of your journey. You've seen deserts that swallow mountains, rivers that defy passage, and skies so vast they make your head spin. How do you explain the subtle terror of a moonless night in the wilderness, or the bone-deep ache of endless walking to someone who has never ventured beyond the city gates? There's a quiet pride, certainly, in having completed such a monumental undertaking. But it's tempered by the memories of hardship, by the faces of those you met along the way, who might not have been so lucky, by the sheer unyielding indifference of the land itself. You carry within you the quiet wisdom of endurance, the understanding that time is measured not just in hours, but in sunrises and sunsets endured in kilometers, shuffled in the slow accumulation of dust and experience. Your body might be weary, but your spirit is etched with the landscape. The rhythm of the camel's gait is still imprinted on your muscles. The whisper of the desert wind still seems to hum in your ears. Even the smells of the bazaar, once overwhelming, now seem muted, your senses subtly recalibrated by the raw elemental world you've just left. You've become accustomed to the quiet spaces, to the internal dialogue of survival. You might find yourself gazing blankly for long stretches, lost in thought, replaying moments of the journey. The taste of cool water at an oasis, the chill of a mountain past the flash of a merchant's smile. The subtle sway of a silk bale. These are not just memories. They are sensations deeply ingrained, and they will linger, a constant echo in your consciousness. The melancholy is not a burden, not entirely. It's a muse, a quiet wellspring of reflection. It forces you to contemplate the meaning of home, of human connection, of the sheer audacity of trade across such vast distances. It reminds you of the resilience of the human spirit, yes, but also of its fragility. You are a different person than the one who set out fundamentally altered by the relentless embrace of the road. As you finally pass through the city gates, or perhaps see the familiar walls of your own compound, the sense of accomplishment is profound. You've brought your goods, your profits, and most importantly, yourself home. But as you embrace loved ones or begin the slow process of settling back into domesticity, a part of you will always be out there on the long, dusty path. The journey may be over, but Caravan Yawn has settled deep into your bones, a rhythmic, gentle reminder of the endless miles, the constant striving, and the quiet, enduring spirit of the merchants who shaped the world, one slow, weary step at a time. And in those moments, a peculiar, almost nostalgic ache will stir within you, a longing for the very hardships you just endured. A strange, enduring paradox. The journey is officially over. The last of your goods are unloaded, accounted for, and safely stored. The camels, those stoic, long-suffering companions, are led away to pasture their humps, perhaps a little less proud, their gait a little slower. You have returned to the familiar rhythms of daily life, surrounded by the comforting sounds and sights of home. But even as you settle into your own bed, the soft mattress a shock after months on hard ground, the Silk Road is not entirely finished with you. It lingers, a subtle echo, a gentle murmur in the quiet spaces of your mind, dreaming of distant sands. The world you left behind, the one of endless dust and silent vistas, now exists primarily in your memory, a vast tapestry woven from exhaustion, wonder, and profound solitude. You might find yourself staring out a window, not truly seeing the bustling street or the familiar garden, but instead seeing the shimmering heat haze of a desert plain, or the stark, majestic silhouette of a mountain range against a twilight sky. It's a phantom limb of your experience, a part of you that still feels the rhythmic sway of the caravan. One mainstream historical fact that beautifully encapsulates this lingering presence is the enduring legacy of the Silk Road, not just in terms of trade, but in the diffusion of ideas, religions, and technologies. Long after the individual footsteps faded from the sand, the impact of these journeys continued to shape civilizations. Think of the spread of Buddhism from India to China, or the transmission of paper-making techniques from China to the West. Each weary merchant, each dusty traveler, was an unwitting conduit for cultural transformation, carrying not just goods, but also the very seeds of intellectual and spiritual change across vast distances. And here's a quirky tidbit that might surprise you about how the road imprinted itself on the travelers' minds. Some returning merchants, despite their initial vows never to set foot on a camel again, would sometimes find themselves compulsively tracing the routes on old maps or even drawing rough sketches of the landscapes they'd traversed. It was a subconscious way of processing the immensity of their experience, a kind of mental map-making that tried to bring order to the boundless chaos of the journey. Imagine a grizzled trader sipping tea, absent-mindedly sketching a mountain pass he'd cursed only weeks before, a true artist of exhaustion. Historians still argue whether the romanticized image of the Silk Road in modern times truly reflects the grueling, often monotonous reality faced by the average trader, or if it's a nostalgic simplification of a far harsher truth. You, with the lingering aches in your muscles and the dust still settling in your memory, know the truth lies somewhere in between. It was both arduous and, in its own strange way, profoundly transformative. At night, sleep comes more easily now, but it's often a restless sleep filled with vivid, dreamlike sequences of your travels. You might be back on the camel, feeling its steady rocking gait. You might hear the distant, unsettling howl of a desert animal or the creak of an ancient caravanserai gate. The faces of the people you met, the stern officials, the haggling merchants, the silent companions, might flicker through your slumber. These aren't nightmares, not exactly. They're just the mind's way of processing an experience too vast to be contained by waking hours. The scents, too, linger. The dry, earthy smell of the desert, the sweet perfume of spices, the damp tang of a river crossing. They resurface unexpectedly, triggered by a passing breeze, a particular aroma from a kitchen, or even just a subtle shift in the air. They are sensory postcards from your journey, always reminding you of where you've been. You might find moments of quiet reflection, sitting by a window watching the sun set over familiar rooftops. The world outside feels smaller now somehow. The concerns of your neighbors, once paramount, now seem contained miniature. You've seen the edge of the known world, and it has expanded your own internal landscape irrevocably. The dust of distant lands is in your blood, a permanent souvenir. And then sometimes in the deepest part of the night, when all is quiet, you might feel a strange, almost inexplicable pull, a faint yearning for the open road, for the vast silent spaces, for the stark, uncompromising honesty of the desert. It's not a desire to return to the hardships, no, never that, but rather a quiet acknowledgement of the unique kind of freedom and profound introspection that only such a journey can offer. The endless horizon, the indifferent stars, the constant challenge, they become a part of your internal landscape, a backdrop against which all future experiences will be measured. The Silk Road, you realize, is not just a historical pathway. It is a state of being a journey of the soul as much as the body. It's a testament to human endurance, to the unyielding spirit of commerce, and to the subtle ways in which the world changes those who dare to traverse its ancient dusty paths. And as you drift deeper into sleep, the final image in your mind is of that long, undulating line of camels, their shadows stretching into the setting sun, moving ever so slowly across the vast, dreaming sands. The caravan yawns on in your memories forever. The air around you grows softer now, the last whispers of the desert wind fading into a gentle sigh. Feel the weight lift from your shoulders, the last vestiges of dust settling, dissolving into the quiet comfort of your surroundings. Your breath deepens, slowing, becoming a peaceful rhythm. The images of endless roads, of distant mountains, of bustling bazaars gently recede, blurring at the edges like old photographs. There's no more need to walk, no more need to strive, no more need to listen for the shifting sands. Just release. Let the echoes of the ancient world become faint, distant lullabies, carrying you further into the quiet depths. The journey is complete, the tale's told, and the weariness now transforms into a profound, comforting stillness. Rest, drift. The Silk Road has delivered you safely home, wrapped in the quiet peace of its timeless stories. Sweet dreams.